everybody, it's Josh Runkelwist here, and it's time for me to talk about my top 10 albums of 2005. And if you've been keeping track, once we're done with this list, we are halfway done with this series, and that feels so wrong to say that. Coming in at number 10 is Corrosion of Conformity with In the Arms of God. The lone album, at least so far, without Reed Mullen on drums, and actually jazz, funk, Louisiana drummer Stanton Moore playing on this album. And he really does bring a really fresh, cool take to the drums on this album. It's so cool hearing him play this kind of style of music. I think he might be in the band now, or he at least did some shows with the band. I don't know everything. Waiting for official notice on that, but I really hope that he takes over because he did a damn fine job here. And this is my favorite Corrosion of Conformity album. And I say that with a little bit of a sadness with that, because I did consider Reed Mullen a friend of mine who I got to interview a few times over the years. One time never officially got to make it into a real interview, but we got to hang out many times once Corrosion of Conformity reformed in all of its ways. But it all started for me here in 2005, thanks to a Modern Drummer article featuring Stanton Moore talking about this album, and I just love everything about it. I love the Sabbath vibes on here, I love the more stoner vibes on here, which I'm not normally a stoner fan, but COC always seems to do it right. Whether it gets a little bit faster, whether it gets a little more mid-tempo or slow, Corrosion always hits it right, and I love this album. I know it's not their 90s output, but I do think it is the best. And you might feel the same way if you're looking for something in that stoner rock, stoner metal, hard rock, heavy metal kind of vibe. And of course, if you love the voice of Pepper Keenan, this is the album for you. Coming in at number 9 is Clutch with Robot Hive Exodus. And while they did explore a lot of blues before this album, this really feels like the first time they really incorporated that southern rock and blues feel more than any other album. Of course, again, like Jam Room and Pure Rock Fury, there was hints of blues and jam band kind of stuff going on, but this is the album that really goes further into that. A very left-wing album, which I truly appreciate, but also an album that's just filled with some of the most sensational lyrics, absolutely spellbinding musicianship and songwriting. The addition of keyboards on this album just make this an album that is so worthwhile. And again, going back into the lyrics, like, how many albums are you going to see with a song like 100011 10101? You're not. And talk about ribonucleic acid freakouts, the power of prayer. Yes, I could go on and on about the lyrics on this album. I just love it so much. Neil Fallon is one of the best lyricists in rock and metal. And while this album, again, takes more of that southern blues approach more than other albums, although latter day albums have more of that as well, this is the first time it really comes into it. And if you want a little bit of that hard rock, heavy metal, southern rock, blues rock feel, it doesn't get better than Robot Hive Exodus. Up next at number 8 is the 9th album from the band Boris. And that's out of 29 original albums that are not collaborations. To call this band prolific is a complete and utter understatement. This is my favorite album from Boris. It is the most hard-rocking, heavy metal album that they do, and depending on how you look at it, it is in a way the heaviest, although they have plenty of doom and drone albums and noise albums with Merzbow that kind of take that to a different kind of heavy. But if you're looking for like the most almost kind of mainline, streamlined, most commercial sounding Boris sounds this side of J-Rock, this is the album for you. It's the first album I heard from Boris, and it's always going to be my favorite. There's other ones that come very, very close to this album, but nothing tops it for me. Whether you got the title track or my personal favorite song that they've done, Just Abandon Myself, which is a 20-minute sampler of everything Boris is about in brand new material. It's all one song, but it goes from extremely fast and keeps getting slower and slower and slower and slower until it gets into doom and then drone. And it feels so natural the way they do it. You forget that it even happens. It's also a song I want played at my funeral, and I have it on my funeral playlist just to be a little bit morbid about it. But yes, this album is pure perfection. There's a reason why they've toured behind this album on more than one occasion, and I wish I could have saw that, but life happens. If you want an introduction into what Boris is all about, with a little bit of everything that they do, not too much of one of anything, just a great sampler of everything with all original music, check out Boris and check out Pink. Coming up next is Darkest Hour with Undoing Ruin, one of the most underrated metalcore bands, or second wave metalcore as I like to refer to it as, there has been. And I've always gravitated towards those bands. I mean, obviously I love like Killswitch Engage, Lamb of God I feel so about, but there are bands like God Forbid and Darkest Hour that I just truly love, and I wish they would have gotten more recognition when they were at the peak of their popularity. Both of these albums, this and another album I'll be talking about later on in this series, both produced by Devin Townsend, both featuring a good friend of mine, Chris Norris, on guitar, and both albums are top-tier Darkest Hour. Like, if you could only choose two of them to listen to, it's this one and the next album, which again, I'll be talking about later. But Undoing Ruin is the first of this. It's a little more hardcore than the next album, but I really love everything that's going on here, whether it's the catchy choruses, whether it's the fantastic guitar solos, whether it's that heavy production style. Everything just works perfectly in this band. And if you're willing to give it a shot, I could not recommend Darkest Hour more. Seriously, give them a pure proper shot. They are so damn good. And all it takes is just listening to them to understand why. Number 6 is the final album from Sentenced, appropriately titled The Funeral Album. Now, if this would have came out in 2004 or even 2006, this album would be much higher, but 2005 had so many of my favorite albums from bands that I could only put this at number 6, and that is a crying shame because this is easily my favorite Sentenced album. And again, on any other year, this would be much higher, if not atop of a particular year. But that shows how good 2005 was, isn't it? Of course, with founding guitarist sadly passing away, Sentenced was done. They did not want to continue anymore, and the appropriately titled Funeral Album is the perfect send-off. Every song in some sort of way is about dying or suicide, as they love to do, very tongue-in-cheek. Or you have a song like Drain Me, which could be about dying, it could also be about oral, depending on how you look at it. Just listen to the lyrics and make your own equation. But I love this album, whether it gets a little more bluesy harmonica, whether it gets near black metal, death metal territory in their instrumental, or just saying goodbye to the fans. It's got everything that you would want in a final album from a band. They knew going in this was going to be the end, so they wanted to be able to write their best material possible and make it a proper send-off to their founding guitarist and to the band and to themselves. Of course, other bands came out of Sentenced, whether it's The Man-Eating Tree, whether it's Poison Black, whether it's other solo material. There's so many projects that did come out from Sentenced, but still my favorite will always be Sentenced, and I miss them to this day. And I'm so thankful that they were around to be able to create the music that they did, and this is one of the greatest final albums a band has ever put out. Hey, that would be a fun top 10 list to do, the top 10 final albums. It's almost like I did a written version of that, but maybe I should do a YouTube version as well. Coming in at number 5 is one of the most commercially successful, but also misunderstood albums in their catalog. It is Soilwork with Stabbing the Drama. And especially after their previous two albums, which may be their best albums, this album took a bit more of a commercial turn. Not as much as their next album did. And that one's actually one of my least favorite Soilwork albums, but this one hit everything that I was looking for. It has some of that old school Soilwork feeling behind it, it has some of the stuff that they'd be doing in the future, but it's that perfect borderline of almost top 40 hard rock, melodic death metal, and just the right amount of prog. And of course, when you got Dirk Van Buren being able to do some Dirk blasts on this album, you got Speed doing his magnificent screams and clean vocals, and of course when you had Peter Witchers doing one of his final performances with the band, not his final, but close to it. Just everything came together the way that it really should. This is one of the finest Soilwork albums, and I think you should check it out, whether you are a Melodeath fan, whether you're a progressive metal fan, whether you're an alternative hard rock fan. I think you'll find something to appreciate about this album. And the song Nerve did what Meshuggah's Bleed did a few years before. Don't believe me? Check out the song. Coming in at number 5 is Between the Buried and Me with Alaska. And this might even be one of the most underrated BT BAM albums to date, because you have something like The Silent Circus that really broke the band. Then you have Alaska, which did garner a lot of attention. Mike Portnoy of Dream Theater discovered BT Bam on this album because of the song Selkie's The Endless Obsession, which is one of their best songs they've ever created. But of course, the album which, of course, will be talked about in 2007, Colors, is really the album where they broke through more than they ever could have dreamed of. This was the album in between, and this is an album that should be celebrated much, much more than it is. It is so much proggier than the Silent Circus. It's not the full-blown concept album that Colors is. It's right in between, with individual songs being able to have some of the last remnants of the grindcore sound and deathcore sounds that they had, whereas Colors almost completely got rid of the deathcore sound. This has the last remnants of that. Much more prog, like I mentioned, a lot more experimentation. You start hearing Faith No More and Mike Patton influences all over this thing. Hell, it's even influenced me, not just in my playing, which I used to be able to play this album from start to finish, and I wish I still could, but I also took the song Backwards Marathon, which I do for my series where I go over bands' discographies and rank them. I used to do it in written form on my website, and now I do it in the YouTube version. And I got a new one coming up on Monday, if you're checking this out the day that it comes out, so go and check that out. But yeah, everything about this album is just exactly what I described in the For Fans section. Adult, contemporary, progressive death metal. Seriously, if you've never checked this album out, if you've checked out Colors, if you've checked out The Great Misdirect, you need to check out Alaska. At number 3, we have Dredge with Catch Without Arms, a part of their amazing 3-album streak, right smack dab in the middle at number 2. And while El Cielo was this grand, magnificent concept album about sleep paralysis, this album is an album of contrast, where you can have two different ideas that are polar opposites, but they still form together in their own separate way. And you can listen to that through the lyrics, you can listen to that through the music, and you can check that out through the album artwork that comes with the booklets, or you can check it out online if you can't find the physical version of it. But all of that said, this is the biggest Dredge album. It got them on Jimmy Kimmel Live of all places, it got them on some magnificent tours. It was their shining moment. I'm almost convinced it is their best album. Like, with their amazing 3-album streak that they had, I can make the case for any of those 3 albums being their best album, and hey, maybe I should do a Backwards Marathon on that as well. But this is probably the most commercial, this is the most closest to hard rock, top 40 rock sounding, while being completely its own. There's a lot of prog elements to this, there's a lot of post-rock, art rock feelings, but again, it's arguably their most commercial as well too, so if it sounds like I'm up my own ass talking about this album, I think you should just listen to it yourself and see that you can be progressive and mainstream at the same time. Again, it's an album of contrast. Coming in at number 2 might be a shock to some people not seeing it in number 1, but once I get to number 1, I think you'll understand why. This is Strap Young Lad's Alien, the 4th and penultimate album from Strap Young Lad, and this is the most extreme album potentially ever made, but easily in the Strap Young Lad discography. Everything is turned up to 13 on this album. I mean, if 11 is Spinal Tap, 13 is Strap Young Lad. Like, this album is so brutal in every conceivable way. Musically, it's absolutely bonkers. Lyrically, you can tell that Devin Townsend went off his medication for this album, and thankfully he doesn't need to be on medication anymore, but during this, you almost kind of think that he should have went back on the medication, because it's just batshit crazy. And I love it for that reason. I mean, of course, you have the most successful Strapping On Lad song, Love, on this album, but you also have songs like Shitstorm and Selkies and 2 Weeks, which is such a odd song to put on this album. Almost everything about this album is pure and utter perfection. There is one example on this album that keeps it from being number 1, and I had to be honest with myself with it, and it is the final track, Info Dump. I am aware that if you fully go up your own ass and you're able to comprehend that there is something that goes on between the guitar feedback and Morse code and distortion and all of these things that goes on, there's actually something to it. I can't. I like songs and that's not a song to me. That's also why if you check out my backwards marathon on Devin Townsend, you'll see his songs where he does things like this, like on DevLab and The Hummer, and his 2 albums that just came out a couple years ago are more on the bottom of the discography for me because I just like normal songs. I like songs that I can comprehend, where Info Dump is not something to really comprehend unless you have your tinfoil hat on, and I don't wear hats. Even if you check out up here, maybe I should start doing that. But I'm not going to. But in every other way, this is Strapping Lad's finest hour, and this won't be the last time you hear from Strapping Lad in this series, but Alien is potentially the best album in the Strapping Lad discography. Of course, there is an argument to be made about City, but that is a conversation for another time. And finally, at number 1 is an album that I don't think many, if any other King's X fan would actually agree with me with. But let me explain. It is King's X with Ogre Tones. My very first King's X album. It's not just because of nostalgia, I promise you. But I listened to this album to death. It had everything I was looking for. The down tuning at the time I was looking for. The super catchy choruses. Great solos at the right spots, everyone on this album singing, pure perfection. The down-tuned version of Goldilocks, I still love both versions. I love the original, I love the Ogre Tones version. I'm not going to choose either, I love both. I know the words to every single song on this album, and I can sing all of it as well. Like when I listen to this album, I sing along with it every time. No, you won't hear me do it. I'm not a singer. Maybe a backup singer, but not a lead singer. But this album helped me discover King's X. It led me down all the different paths of what King's X is all about, from their greatest albums to their not so greatest albums, to their latest album, which I really hope won't be the last one. I hope they got at least one more in them. Everything about this album is fantastic. I know they toured and played this album in its entirety right before I was able to go see them live, and that hurts me to this day. I wanted to go see them so bad, and it was right before I turned 16, so I was not able to make that happen. And I don't think they've played an Ogre Tones song since, so maybe they wiped themselves from it. Maybe they don't even like the album anymore, for all I know. But I do know for me, it is a perfect King's X album from start to finish. I love every song on it, even Bam, which is just an outro kind of thing, and not even really a song. But I think everything on here is warranted to be on here, and I hope at some point they do bring back at least one song off this album. I'd love to go see them again, and just hear an Ogre Tones song live, please. Please make that happen. And there you go, folks, my top 10 albums of 2005. And I can't believe I'm halfway done with this series. We went from 1988 now to 2005. Now we gotta do the second half of 2006 through 2022. So what do you think so far? What about this particular part of the series? Did you find any new discoveries? Do you agree with my list? Do you think I'm wrong for my own personal opinion? Or for the overall first half of this series, have you found any new bands because of this series? Have you rediscovered any albums? Do you think I'm completely wrong in all of my thoughts? Let me know in the comments down below. Anything that you want to talk about in regards to that. And until next week, when we start the second half of the series with the top 10 albums of 2006, well, it's my backwards marathon, which will be on Mastodon coming out this coming Monday. Any other top 10 lists that I do, including my top 10 albums of April 2023, which is available now, which went up yesterday, or any other kind of video that I put up here on the Heavy Debriefings YouTube channel. For Heavy Debriefings, as Josh Runk was saying, see ya.